All right, so today we're talking about Flask, and what Flask is in terms of the Python stack is that this is a server framework. And it's basically like a micro framework because it doesn't impose a ton of opinions on you, just lets you do some basic things. All right. So before we even create a Flask project, we're going to do something to set up a virtual environment. You guys remember coming across this in the platform? Virtual environments, right? Okay, cool. So I've deleted an old virtual environment that I had, and I'm going to create a new one. So does anyone remember what the command is for creating a virtual environment?
Soft.
Resource.
Source.
Okay.
And the name of the environment.
So that would be to activate the environment, right? So how do I actually create one? So Python 3-m, right? V and V. Okay, and then we're going to say the name of our environment. We're just going to call this environment Flask because that's what we're using. However, I'm trying to put it in a different directory than I'm in right now. So I've got this little folder called Hello Flask. That's just where we're going to create our project.
Do you put CD or do you just put the path?
Well, I'm just going to put the path in here. So I'm going to go up a couple levels, and then I have an environments folder. And then we're just going to call the environment Flask.
I think we already made all these.
Yeah, and you probably did. That's probably right. So in order to actually use this environment, what do we need to do? Activate it. Very good. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say source, and the command on Windows is, I believe it's call, right? And then you would say the name of the environment / scripts / activate. Do I have that right? For Windows? Okay, so for us, what we're going to do is I'm going to go up a couple levels again, environments, Flask / bin / activate. Okay? And then you can see that your environment is activated because the name of the environment will be in parentheses over here on the left. Now what we want to do, because this is our Flask environment, is we want to actually install Flask so that we can use it. All right, let's do that. So how do we install?
You type install?
Say that again?
You type install?
No.
You need to type it.
Pip, correct. Yeah, we need to do pip install Flask. Okay. So we had a little warning. It's not really a warning, it's just kind of a notification that I can upgrade pip. I'm not going to bother with that right now, but you could run that command if you wanted to update pip inside your virtual environment. All right, cool. So now that we have Flask, what we want to do is actually create a server file, which is where all of our logic is going to happen.
Will this be recorded?
Huh?
Will this be recorded?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's create that file. I'll just come over here and create a server.py. Now keep in mind, we're calling it server.py. You could name the file something else. I would recommend being fairly consistent about it. So for each project that you guys create, you'll have a folder for that project, and then there will be a server file inside of there where all the logic is happening. All right? So inside this server.py, I need to actually import some things from Flask. And this is how we'll do it. So we'll say from Flask, I'm going to import Flask. Okay? What does this Flask in capital letters look like to you guys?
Class.
A class. Very good. Excellent. Mm-hmm.
Are those dots between the words like automatic?
If you show white space in your VS Code. So I've turned on white space in mine so that I can see all the spaces. You may or may not want to do that. Sometimes I've seen a couple people run into issues where they had like some hidden white space characters that were messing up their code. So that could help you in that case. The next thing that we want to do is we actually want to create an application. And this is how we're going to do it. So we're going to create an instance of the Flask class, right? And what we're going to pass into that is going to be this variable called name. Has anyone come across the name variable yet in the platform?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what does that mean? Name.
It's a attribute that's on the file that you're looking at, or it's the name of the file. I don't know if it's an attribute.
So there are two possibilities for the name variable. Either it's going to be _main, or it's going to be the actual name of the file. So if I'm importing the file from somewhere else, it would give me back the name of the file. But if I'm just running it as is, if I'm just running this server.py, it should give me the _main. Okay.
And I think they showed you in one of the tabs that shows you how to override taking the parent name when you import.
Oh yeah, because they were kind of showing you how you could import from a different file, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. So let's actually, when we run this, let's just print out what name is so that we know what this is. So that. Yeah, in fact, I'm just going to comment this out for a second, and let's just run this file, right? So we'll go Python server.py. Okay, so you can see that we've got main right there. So that means that the file is being run directly, right? So let me get rid of this. That was just to show you guys. Now, in order to actually run this application, does anyone know what I need to put down here, like at the bottom of my file? Has anyone gotten to Flask yet? No, this is all brand new for everyone? Okay, cool. All right, so what we need to do is we need to invoke a method, because remember, this is now an instance of the Flask class, and the method is just called run. So I can just say app.run, and then I can pass some options to this. I'm going to say that I want debugging to be turned on. And what that's going to do is it's going to show us every time we hit a URL on our application, it's just going to show us what URL was hit. Okay? So the other thing that I want to do down here is, and they'll show you this in the platform too, we really only want to run the application if this file is being run directly. If it's being imported by something else, like maybe another file is importing it to run some tests or something, we don't necessarily need to run our application, right? So we'll just do a little conditional in here. So we'll say if this variable name equals _main, then we want to run it, right? Okay? So right there, this is like the core of what we need to do to actually run a Flask application. So let's try to run it. Okay? And you notice here it's telling me this is running on this particular IP address at port 5000. And you can actually click that if you want to go directly to it. I'll just go to my browser over here. Let's see, localhost 5000. Okay. How do I know that this is actually my application? Does anyone know? Let's just put in a bad address in our address bar, right? Like .com. Okay, so notice what we get here if we type in a bad address, something like that, right? But what are we seeing here? We're seeing a not found message, and it's saying the requested URL is not found on the server. And then if I go back to my code down here, you'll see that we actually got some things registered. A URL in our application was hit, right? A GET request was made to the root route, and there was also a GET request made to the favicon.ico. Does anyone know what the favicon is?
Is that like you can make little icons at the very top of the URL?
Yeah, so when you look at the address bar in your browser, you'll see those little things identifying each site. Some sites actually don't have them, so it'll just use a default one. And like in this case, we haven't actually provided one for the favicon route, which means that Chrome or whatever browser you're using is just going to show a default one. Okay.
So if you did localhost like 7,000, for example, would it still show that same screen, but then the only way you would know that it's yours is to check this? Is that right?
Yeah, so let's actually change the port. And we can do that down here if we want. So if I want this to run on 7,000.
No, I mean like on the other screen, like the browser.
Yeah, so obviously we don't have anything running on 7,000 right now, so we should see
The same
a
thing?
different screen.
Okay.
Because in this case, we know the application is running,
Okay.
but there was nothing handling that particular route, right? So if I go to 7,000,
Okay.
nothing
I
at
just wanted
all,
to see that.
right? Yeah, but I did want to show you guys that you could change the port on this if you wanted. So I can say port equals 7,000, debug equals true. So I can add that as another argument, right? I'm not sure if that would change with the, you see that we're getting hot reloading here. Yeah, that doesn't work there. So if you change the port number, you'd actually have to stop and restart. But normally what's happening, because we turned debug on, is that all the changes that we're making to the code is going to be reflected right away. So I can refresh my page and see the new version of whatever I've done, right? Okay, so now if we go back here, I should be able to reload that because now we're running on port 7,000. Okay? So the next thing that we need to do, because obviously we're not handling any different routes in this application. We don't have anything that we're returning from it. So let's fix that. So the way that we're going to set up a route is we're going to use something called a decorator. Okay? And we're going to say app.route, and then we have to pass in what is the route that we're handling right now. Okay? So if we're doing the index route or the main, just the localhost 7,000 route, we just need to pass in a /. So it needs to be a string though. So let's go like this. And then when we use a decorator like this, we need to pair it with a function. So we have to immediately put a function underneath that's going to be able to handle this specific route. Okay? So let's just say def index. And when we hit that route, let's just return something. So let's say return hello Flask. Like that. Okay, and now we're always hot reloading here, so we can go check our page and see if it's working. So there we go. So I mean, we have our very first server right here. It's super simple. There's not a lot of complicated logic going on or anything. But if we go back here, I can also, if I wanted to, I can render some HTML tags in there. So let's just maybe surround this with an H1 tag. All right. Let's put an H1 here, and then we'll close it off. Another H1. Go back, reload, and there we go. All right. So we can throw HTML into our return value. But let's ask ourselves, can you imagine actually writing a somewhat complex page like this? It'd be a terrible pain in the butt, right? So we'd have to do a lot of string concatenation where we were doing plus this, plus that, and so forth. We don't really want to do it that way. Instead, what we want to use is templating. So we want to be able to set up these template files where we can put in some basic stuff that's always going to be there, and then we can also have some other things that are dependent on maybe the user who's using it, or whatever the state of the application is. So to do templating in Flask, what we need to do is we have to set up a new folder called templates, because that's where Flask is going to look for our templates. So let's create that. And then inside this templates folder, I can create different HTML files. Right? Flask uses something called Jinja to render templates. So there's this templating engine called Jinja, and we can look it up online. Jinja 2 template. Yeah, so here is the actual documentation site for Jinja. So if you guys ever have any questions, I'll try to post a link to this on the schedule as well. So if you have questions about what can I do or can't I do inside a template, you would look on the documentation site. All right. So let's go back here. We haven't created any templates yet, so I'm just going to create an index.html template for that main route, right? And then inside here, I'll just drop in some boilerplate. So if you guys noticed that or saw that, I just typed in an exclamation point, and then I used autocomplete with VS Code to give me all of this. Okay, so you'd hit the tab key, and that would give you sort of your basic HTML structure. All right, and then in here, we're just going to basically return out what we had already, which was this hello Flask message. And then inside my server, rather than returning this, I'm going to render a template. So let's do this. We'll say return render template. And then I need to tell it what the name of the file is. So automatically Flask is going to look inside the templates folder, but I just need to say what template am I going to render here. Okay? So the one that we just made is index.html. And let's look at this error that we're getting here. So I'm getting some squiggly going on here. Undefined variable. So how do you think we're going to fix this? We're going to make it, all right. So that could potentially be a lot of code to write, right? I mean, we might have to create a render template function. Could be quite a pain in the butt. Yes?
I think we didn't import the library.
Yeah. So Flask gives us a function called render template, but we do need to bring it into this file, otherwise it's not something that you can use. Okay. So this is something you guys always need to remember, is that if I'm using something, whether it be a function or a variable or whatever, I either need to create that thing or I need to import it from somewhere. It can't just come out of thin air. Okay. All right, so let's import that from Flask up here. That should fix that there. Now notice some of these guys are still kind of squiggly. Why do you think that is?
So should that be capitalized at the top? Or no?
Which one?
The Flask.
Oh, no.
First one? No.
Nope. This is kind of tricky, but what's happening is that VS Code doesn't know about the virtual environment that we're running. So it doesn't know that we even have access to Flask here. So it's giving us these warnings all over the place. Hey, you don't have Flask, right? There is a way to handle that. So if we were to create our virtual environment in here, we would be able to run it in such a way that it would be aware of it. And I'm considering maybe going over that tomorrow afternoon, because it's not something that's really discussed in the platform. In the platform, they advocate you just creating kind of one environment that you use for all your projects. So instead, to do it the other way, you'd create a virtual environment for each project you make. So it'd be like a slight amount more of work, but take care of some of that issues for you. Okay, so let's look and see if we're getting what we're expecting. Actually, let me just change this because I want to make it very clear that this is coming from the template. So say hello from the template. Okay, go back to our project here. All right, so now we're actually rendering a template. That's kind of nice, right? What else might we want to happen here? I mean, you guys just came from Web Fundamentals. What else might we want to do with our page to make it look a little bit better?
Like that.
Yeah, we might want to have some style, right? So let's create, excuse me, a style sheet that can go with this, and I'll probably create a style that's ugly or something, just so that we can see that it's actually rendering. All right. So to do that with Flask, we're going to create another folder called static, and that's where we're going to hold all of our static files. Obviously, CSS is a static type of file. What other types of static files might we have?
Images.
That's a good one. Yeah, excellent. Anything else? So a static file is something that's not going to change. It's always going to be the same. What other kind of static file might we have? What were you guys working on in the second week of WebFund? jQuery, yeah, okay. I mean, so it wouldn't. Maybe you'd have jQuery itself in there, but we might also just have our JavaScript code that was using jQuery, or just plain old JavaScript code, right? So we could have a JavaScript file that would be a static file that wouldn't change. All right. So let's create this folder where we can put some static files. We'll just call it static. And then inside there, we'll just create a style.css. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for my body, I want the background to be light green. Cool. All right, so how do you guys think that we're going to load this up?
Same as usual.
I think you have to put a link to the CSS file.
Yeah, we want to actually link the style sheet here. So we'll say link. And then the difference here is that I'm going to use a function that Flask gives us to basically route to specific files in my static folder. All right? So the way that we output something to our template in Flask is that we're going to use these double mustache tags. Okay? Yeah, sounds kind of funny, right? But this is how this looks, though. Like that. Like that, okay? So if ever I want to output something to the template, I need to use double curly braces. And then inside that, I'm going to use this function that Flask gives us, URL for, okay? And then inside there, what I need to say is that it's going to be something inside the static folder. So I'll pass in the string static. And then I want to say, what is the file name? Okay, so the file name here is just going to be our style.css, right? So let's put that in too. All right, save that guy, and then let's go back to our application and see if it's actually happening. All right, cool. And then if we view the page source, you'll see turned it into that. Okay, so it actually turned, using that function, it turned it into something that the browser can understand. Okay. Next, what we want to do, whoops, let me make sure I didn't forget to mention anything here. Holy moly. Okay, so we did all that stuff, linked all that. Okay, so the other thing that we want to talk about is actually bringing some data into the template. So right now, the template's not doing anything except just like rendering some HTML. That's it, right? What if I want to pass some information to the template, which we're going to be doing all the time. So when we render out a page, we want to have some specific information showing on that page, right? So let's create a user. All right, so inside here, who wants to be my first user? He was going to volunteer. Good job. All right. So what kind of data structure might we turn a user into, or might we want a user to be? We want to have more than just a name, maybe, right? Object. What do we call those in Python? Yeah, I mean, we're not going to make a user class here. We're just going to make something that we can. But that's a good idea. Yeah, let's just make it a dictionary. Good call. All right.
I said enough.
Yeah, eventually we'll land on the right thing, right? Okay, so let's just give some information here. So we want to say the first name is Mark. I don't know your last name though, Mark. Lopez. Okay. Cool. What's that? All right, and then maybe we'll say like hair color. What is it, brown? Charcoal. All right, dark brown. All right. Yeah, let's go with charcoal. That's interesting. All right, cool. So now what I need to do, so I've created this variable right here, just a dictionary, but I need to pass it to our template to actually do something with it. So inside here, as an additional argument, I'm just going to say, I'm going to give this variable name user, and then I'm going to set it equal to this user that we just created over here. Okay, so we'll say user equals user. Does this part bother anyone? Because I see that I feel like there's a potential for that to bother someone. I want to see if it does.
That's the self kind of reference, or what is going on?
But the variables could get confusing.
So so here's what's going on. This part is the variable that our template is going to have access to. Okay. This part right here is the user that I just created right here. So I could call this something else. If I wanted this to be called inside my template, if I wanted it to be called person, I could go like that. I could say inside my template, this user is going to be called person. Okay. So let's just do it that way for the sake of clarity for right now. So inside my template, let's say I wanted to just render the person's first name, for instance. How would I do that? So let's do a p tag in here. What's that?
It's like, oh, it's P tags.
Ah, p tags are back. So, all right. So I'm trying to render out the person's first name. How do I do that?
You need the other end of the double mustache too.
Yeah, and I'll put those in a second. But
Person?
okay, yeah. So we're calling it in the template person, right? And then how do I get a specific attribute of that person?
Dot.
Equals?
ID? Do we have an ID here? No, our user didn't have an ID, right? Our user only has a first name, last name, and hair color right now.
Did we give it an
Yeah,
So do you put the bracket?
but I'm not going to bother with that right
Oh,
now. No, we could though.
Put the bracket in the name of the.
Yes.
attribute that you want?
There you go. Cool. So we want to say, yeah. So we want to say first name, like that, and then obviously close it out, right? Double mustache. Yeah, so let's refresh that, and here we go. We've got Mark's first name.
There you
Right? You're in the mix. All right, so obviously we can do the same thing with your other attributes. We can say last name. Could do your hair color down here. Whoops. Hari color, yeah, exactly. Okay. So there we go. So this is how we can dynamically render some information to our template just by passing through a variable.
So
Right.
if you wanted the key and then a colon to display before Mark Lopez charcoal.
Let's do that. Yeah, it's a good idea. So we might want to make this clear to the user, you know, what am I actually looking at? Well, let's just say first name. That, yeah, super simple, right? Last name.
So you're typing in something. You're not calling it from the dictionary.
Yeah, so with here, anything that's outside of these double mustache tags is just being rendered as regular HTML. Okay? But anything inside of this, inside of these double mustache tags will actually be outputted. It will be evaluated. Okay? Evaluated in Python.
That's something different than a double dictionary, right? Or is it?
Yeah, no, it's not a double dictionary. No, when we're doing Jinja templating, the two curly braces signifies that we're outputting something. Okay, this value needs to be evaluated. Okay. All right, so that's pretty cool. What if I wanted to do multiple users? So I've got some other people besides Mark, right? What kind of data structure would we use for that?
Could you put it in an array and then just have
Yeah, what's that called in Python?
a list?
A list.
It's
Okay.
dictionaries.
A list of dictionaries. So that sounds like a good plan. So let's just go like this. Okay, so I want to have another one too. All right. Who's going to be the second user?
Mike.
Okay. Michael. Michael, what's your last name?
Peterson.
Peterson. Okay. You have dark hair now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dark mustard.
I like this. Dark mustard. Okay, excellent. So we've got our two users here. So rather than passing in user, which we now have no reference to, right, because I changed the name, let's change this to, I'm just going to be fancy, let's say cohort mates equals this list of users that we just created, right? Okay. So let's go back to our template here. We need to adjust this because we no longer have a single user. We're now going to run through a list of users. So what might be a good way of displaying that?
In a loop?
Yeah, we're definitely going to loop. What kind of HTML structure might we use? JavaScript. That's not an HTML structure.
Oh.
Like, what kind of element might we use for those?
Li.
Okay, yeah, an li might be good. In this case, however, each user has sort of some different things associated with it, right? So what about a table, right? Someone was saying that over there? Okay, cool. So let's just create a table.
I don't think I ever used a table.
You've never used a table?
For our blog.
All right. So I'm typing here, and you guys are probably looking at that going like, what the heck's going on? I'm using Emmet autocomplete to kind of build me this table very quickly because I don't want to go through all the hassle. Notice here it's actually showing me what this is going to do for me. Kind of nice, right? Okay. So to go up a couple levels, I'm going to use this little hat symbol, and then I'm going to do a T-body tag. Inside there, I'm going to have a T-row. And then I'm going to have 3 table datas there. Okay? So let's create that. Nice, right?
Oh, okay, I didn't know you could do that.
Pretty fancy. Yeah, pretty cool. So now the other good thing about this is that because I use the autocomplete, I'll be able to tab between these guys as well. So I can do first name here, last name, tab, hair color. Yeah, it makes your lives a lot easier, right? Now inside this table body, what are we going to want to do with this list of cohort mates? Yes, good. So the way that we're going to do that in Jinja is we're going to use this % here. So I'm going to do a basic for loop. Okay. So how would we do it normally in Python? Like, what would be the easiest way? Say we don't need to know the index of these different list items. So what's the easiest way of iterating through them?
Go for E in list.
Okay. Yeah, so let's just say something like for user in, and what do we call it? You guys remember? Cohort mates, yeah. Okay. And then when we want to end this loop, we just need to do an end for underneath. Okay? So same thing, we're going to do the % again, and we're going to say end for, like that. Okay. So inside this, I'm going to reference this particular variable right here. Okay. So that gives me a reference to the individual user that I'm looping through at that given point in time. Yeah, pretty fancy, right? So how do we output again into the template? The double mustache tag, right? So when we want to actually print something to the screen, we want to use the two curly braces. So let's go like this, and then again we can say user brackets first name like that, and then actually I'm going to get rid of these and just duplicate that to make it a little easier. So I can just change this here to last name. This would be hair color. Oops. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our template and see if this is working the way that it's expected. Lo and behold, it is. Okay. So the big takeaway here that I want you guys to remember is that when we're doing something to control the flow of our code inside Jinja templating, we're going to use the curly brace with a percent sign. Okay. When we want to actually put something on the screen, we use the double curly braces. All right. So there's another thing that I can do to control the structure as well. Like, what if I had some sort of a condition? Right. So what if I only wanted to display someone's hair color if they had what was it, dark mustard? So we go. All right. So I could do that inside this. Let's just connect this here. So let's say I'm going to go like this. If user hair color, let's give me some autocomplete there, equals dark mustard. And then we need to always do that. Then I'm going to show the person's hair color. So if not, I wouldn't expect to see anything for that particular user, right? So then we, instead of doing an end for, here we'll just do an end if. Okay.
What are the percents called?
Percent. I don't know that there's a special name for that actually. Hmm? An ampersand is this thing right here.
Oh.
Yeah, so the and symbol. Okay, so now what's happening is that we're only showing someone's hair color if they have a hair color of dark mustard.
But it keeps the table formatted.
Yeah, so otherwise you'll see that here I'm still showing this table data no matter what. My if condition was actually inside of that. Okay? Any questions about what we just did there with conditional? No? Everyone feels good about that? All right. Okay, so the other thing that we're gonna talk about and do today is just show how to actually take some data in from the user. So let's say I actually wanted to create users and I wanted to have some way of getting their information. What would we normally use for that? A form. Exactly. So let me shut this down a little bit there. Okay, cool. So underneath our table, let's just create a form. Does anyone know or remember what this action means? No?
Is it the post or get thing?
So the action is not the post or get thing, but close. The action just tells it where do I want this the form submission to be routed to. Okay. So let's say I just want it to be routed to a URL called process. That's fine. Okay, and then we also have this other attribute called method. And that means what kind of form submission do I want to do? So what are the two types that you mentioned there? Host and get, right? Yeah. Okay. So if you do not specify this here, this method, it will by default be a get request. Okay, and we'll kind of talk about the difference between those in a second. But for now, let's just say this is going to be a post request. And then
It's not taking a user input.
it is going to, yeah. We'll just basically take in the same stuff that we're displaying on the screen for now. Okay. So I'm going to create an input group. And one thing I just wanted to say about this is that this is an HTML snippet that I've created in VS Code, so you guys can't type input group unless you create a snippet for it. Okay. And I did that just to make my life a little easier because a lot of times we're creating forms and we're just doing, you know, a label and an input inside of a div, something like that, right? Okay. So here I want to call this one first name. And then again I can tab through and change some things about it, so we'll just call it first name. Yeah, so that's an HTML snippet. It can make your life way easier. Last name. Oops.
But you said you can only tab if it's from a template, right?
Yeah, so if you create an HTML snippet like this, I've created placeholders in my snippet for here, here, and here,
Got it.
which means I can tab through all of those different things.
Makes sense.
Okay, one more tab here. Okay, and then the last thing was just going to be our hair color, right? Oops, I'm spelling that wrong. Okay, and then the other thing that we need is we need to have an actual submit button. So I'll just say button submit. Okay, and then if we go back here, we're getting a form, so that's cool. Now, what are we going to need to do to actually handle this submission? Notice that we've said we want this form to be processed by this particular URL. Do we have a URL to process this yet? No, we don't, right? Okay, so let's actually go back to our server and create that. We created our route again by just doing this, so at app.route. Here I'm going to make a different route that will handle a submission, so we'll say at app.route. And then the route is going to be process, exactly like we said in our template. And then the other thing I need to say is because this is a different type of request, it's not a GET request, I need to tell it that this route is going to accept a POST request. The way that we do that is we give it this argument methods, and the methods needs to be a list. Okay, but I'm only going to pass one thing in there. I'm just going to say it will accept POST requests. That's it. Okay, and then what did I say we needed to have right after we use one of these decorators for a route? We need to have an actual function that will handle it. Exactly. So we'll call this function process. Now I just want to print out what came through in the form. I just want to see what it is. That's it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print request.form. And then I'm going to do something else. I'm going to redirect back to the main route like that. What's happening here? I've got some squigglies. Why? Yeah, we don't have access to these things, right? We don't have access to the request. We don't have access to redirect. Fortunately, we don't need to write those functions. Well, actually, I'm sorry. This is not a function. Redirect is a function. Okay, so let's import those from Flask. Request and then redirect. Okay, so all this is going to do right now is it's going to print whatever information came through the form, and then I'm just going to redirect the user right back to the index page. So for us, that's just localhost 7000.
Does that mean that we could go to that URL right now? And put stuff on the form?
This one right here, the process URL. So you won't be able to visit that URL in your browser because it is a POST request. If it was a GET request, yes, you could visit it.
Oh, okay.
It can really only be visited by submitting a form that has a method of POST. Okay. That's kind of the only way to get to it. Yes, Anthony.
So once you import WFlask, why doesn't it squiggle behind all that?
The reason why it's not going away is because, again, VS Code is not aware of our virtual environment. So first it's saying, hey, you don't have access to Flask. Therefore, if I'm importing things from Flask, it's basically saying you don't have access to those either. So, but normally when we see the red squiggly lines, that would mean, okay, it's something that we either need to write or we need to import. Okay. Cool, so let's test this out. And first, before I actually do it, where do you guys think this is going to print? Is this going to print in my browser terminal? So if I open up like my browser console, will it print in there? Or is it going to print in my terminal here for my, my Hello Flask project? Terminal, okay, let's have hands. How many people think that it's going to print in my browser terminal? Anyone else?
I'll leave it.
He does. Okay, you do. All right. So 3 people. How many people think it's going to print here in my terminal in VS Code? 3 people. Where's all the rest? Nobody has an opinion about this?
They're on the fence.
Yeah, wow. Such indecisiveness.
Well, if we can be on the fence, I'll be on the fence.
Take a risk. All right. Yeah, so let's test it out and let's see what happens. Okay, so here, if I submit myself,
Molly, what's the little thing? Little
oh, that's from LastPass, I think. So I use LastPass as a password manager, and it's just like, do you want to fill in your information here? All right. So let's submit this here. And notice how we got redirected right away, so that part we know is working. Let's go and see if anything printed in our terminal. Actually, let me do it here one more time so that you can see. Okay, so nothing printed inside of our terminal in the browser, right? And one of the people who voted for that just left. Yeah, he's like, dang it, I'm gonna be wrong. Yes, Anthony.
If it were to print in the terminal there, then can somebody like spy on you or something like that? Anything out?
Yeah, I mean, anything that's happening down here in the terminal is obviously like very visible.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so let's see where it did actually print. So if I open back up my console here, let's see what happens. So it's kind of hard to see, but we have this thing called an immutable multi-dict, and that was the form data that came through. And you could see that my first name was there, my last name's there, and then the hair color as well. So that's how we're going to be able to get access to the form data when somebody submits a form through our site.
Should be cappuccino brown.
Cappuccino, all right, yeah, let's keep it going. I like that. So so the other thing that we were going to talk about real quick is just the difference between a GET request and a POST request. The main difference is that if I submit this form as a GET request, I'm going to see all of the information up here in the URL. Okay, so let's try that real quick. So if I go back here and I add, if I say this can also take GET requests, and then I'm just going to change the method here to GET. Let's see what happens. No, the table's still the same because remember, I'm always passing it that same. Now later on, obviously, we'll change that up. But for right now, we just have this sort of static list of users that we're passing every time. Okay, so now my form should be a GET request, and let's type it in there. So cappuccino brown. Okay, cool. Was that not a GET request?
Did you say?
I thought I did. Method is GET. Oh, because we redirected, that's why. Hang on one second. Okay, so in our server, rather than redirecting, let's just, I'm just going to temporarily like return out something else. So let's say return hello All right. Here, let's just go back. Cap Brown. Okay, so you'll notice here up in the address bar, we have all of the information that we submitted. So imagine that you're taking in some information from a user and you've taken in like a password or something sensitive. Would you want that to be a GET request? No. So where a GET request becomes useful is if you're doing some kind of search. Like you'll notice that if you're doing a search in Google, when you've made your search, it'll show you all these little parameters up in the address bar. And that's something that you could share with somebody. So I can take that address and I could go email that to someone else and say, hey, visit this. This was my search or whatever. Now they may not get the exact same search results because those things are going to be customized a little bit for them. Okay? But a GET request makes it so that we can actually share a URL and have somebody else visit that same exact address. Now with a POST request, we wouldn't see any of that stuff. We would just see the process address and that's it. So here, if I, let me change this back to a POST. And then we'll go back to the main page real quick. Oh, jeez. Cap Brown. Okay, so now we're not seeing any of that extra information in there because it was a POST request. Yes, Anthony.
When you do the GET request, does it also send it to the Python terminal, like post?
Yeah, if we wanted to, so the way to actually get access to those GET parameters is slightly different. I'll show you real quick, but it's not something that you're going to use much here. But if I wanted to actually print out, let's see, the request.args.get, so I could basically get a specific argument from the form like this. I could say request.args.get, and then I could pass in the name of the thing that I wanted. So if I wanted to just print out the first name, I could go like that. And then here, let's just test it out. So if I go back to my form, I think right now it's still a POST request. Okay, cool. So we'll do a GET request. And then if I go back to my terminal down here, we should see my first name actually printed out. So we did that through request.args.get and then the name of that particular thing that we were looking for. Okay? So I think that's basically it. A quick question though. Why don't we want to render on a POST request? Does anyone have any ideas why we might not want to do that? So we could render out a template when we make a POST request through a form. Have you guys ever seen when you submit a form, it might say something like confirm resubmission or something like that? Like, do you want to submit this form again? Okay. So why could that be a problem if you submit the form again? What if I'm buying something and I just click the complete, but yeah, what if I get charged twice or whatever? Or what if I'm trying to create a user and I submit that twice? Yeah, potentially create two users, right? So by doing this, by redirecting away, after taking in a POST request, we should be able to avoid some of those situations. Because by the time a person has been redirected, they're no longer on that POST request anymore. They've been moved on to a regular page. Okay? And when we make this these form submissions, can you guys guess how many actual requests are being made of the server? Okay. I heard 2. Any other numbers? 6. Okay. When we make a form submission through our application, how many requests are actually being made of the server? Like after we click submit? How many? 1.
Is it based on how many fields?
No, it won't be based on that.
The submit button is one of them, right?
that itself is not a request, but the basically hitting the server is a request. So after we've hit the submit button, what happens? This post request is made to that route. So that's one request. What else do we have going on?
Redirect.
We got a redirect, which means that we're going to have another get request back into the index route, right? Okay. And then there's one other one that you guys might not be thinking about.
Like when you first go onto the page?
No, not that one. So we're saying, again, after the submit button is hit.
Oh.
So there was we hit the process route, that's one request. Then we got redirected back to the index route, that's another one. Anything else? This is tricky. How about this background color? How did we get that?
Oh, that's accessing the file, so we're...
How did we, yeah, we're making a request to actually get our style sheet, right?
So is that doing it for the CSS file and the HTML file?
Yeah, so here if I open up my network tab, and let me clear this out real quick. So let me just submit the form. And let's see, actually we took off the redirecting here, but if I put the redirect back in here, get rid of that, go back here, shoot. Let me turn this back to a post request. Wow, someone's pumped. Someone's birthday, yeah, I figured. Okay, cool. So let me clear out the network there. Okay, so let's see how many requests happened. So we had this one that went to the process URL like we expected. Then we had this one that went back to the index. And then if we go down here, we also got that style.css. So that makes another request to the server to get that file, right? Okay. Any questions about that? Yes.
What about the bot side request?
What's that?
There's another one under the data, that image. Are all of those requests too? Those last two?
Where are these even being made to? I don't know what these are actually.
Did you make an HTML?
Do we have any? Oh, you know what that image is? That's probably that thing that's coming through with LastPass.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in terms of the requests that our server was retrieving, you can see the different ones that were made. So we had this post request that was made to process. We had the get request that was made to the main route, and then we had another one made to our style.css. So that's 3 requests, right? Okay, cool. Any questions? That's it for the day. Let's have thumbs on this. Thumbs. Ooh. Okay, maybe clarifications over here. Over here, ooh, clarifications everywhere. Holy moly. Does anyone have any specific questions, or is it just like,
So
I
you're
don't
gonna
even know what this means?
It was
Put
just a
access to
lot.
the-
I'd have to rewatch this.
Okay, okay.
That's pretty cool
Fair enough.
Are you gonna have the files that you created, like links to them that you can download or something? Or just watch
I wasn't
videos?
planning to, but if there's like big demand for it, I can definitely do it. Yeah.
Pour over.
Yeah.
Are you gonna post this right away?
Yeah, I'll